Sacrifice and suffering of so many who came before us, but especially of those victims of the Holocaust. We don't have words to express our sorrow. The man's inhumanity to man. You taught us to love everyone, and we have so horribly listened to you. We ask you, therefore, to continue to show your mercy upon us and lead us to repentance. And bless this gathering today, and may it fill us with hope and joy and love for you and for all those to whom we owe a debt of gratitude. Amen.
Amen.
Everybody, we have food and drink in the back. Why don't we take about 5 minutes or so? Please help yourself, and then we'll begin the program, okay? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I didn't know both of you were doing this.
Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started with our program today. There are plenty of food and coffee and refreshments. Please help yourself as we begin for the day. I'm going to be your moderator today. My name is Michael Francesco. I think maybe the way to start today is a story. I've always asked when I'm in Greek events, are you Greek? Because my name is Italian. And yes, my mother was Greek, I've answered the question, and my father was Italian from Sicily. And all through my life, my parents, I know I'm going to get to that. Thank you, guys. I'm going to get there. All through my life, my parents would debate who contributed more to Western civilization, the Greeks or the Romans. And to the day they passed away and they lived a long life into their 90s, we never resolved the issue until one day my cousin did a DNA test and we found out that my dad was 75% Greek. So tracing it back to the ancient Greeks who colonized, Syracuse and places in Sicily, where we come from. So, and my mother was less Greek than my dad. Now, if they were alive, I'm sure we would have a whole mess of discussions about this. But anyway, welcome for coming. I'd like to begin to introduce our esteemed president of the HEPA, George Bordas. And have him talk a little bit of our organization, if you don't know who we are, and then into the program for today. So.
Thank you very much, Mike. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for your interest in attending this important presentation, which is very much related to the Greek national holiday of October 28th. My name is George Mortis, and I'd like to start with a very brief history of HEPA and the Alpha Blueprint chapter, which is the one that's hosting this event today. The American Hellenic Educational Professional Association, what we call HEPA, was founded in 1922 in Atlanta, Georgia. And the reason was to help the Greek immigrants of that time to find the discrimination and the bigotry that existed, and to promote the image of the Greek civilization and the principles of Hellenism, ideals, humanism, freedom, and democracy. Later on, with the full assimilation of the Greek Americans, the mission evolved towards preserving Hellenism, promoting the pursuit of knowledge, moderation, philanthropy, and civic responsibility. 2 years after the establishment of the first Brotherhood chapter, the Alpha chapter was the first that was founded in Michigan in 1924. So we are already celebrating our 100th anniversary also for our chapter. Thank you. Since 1924, the District 10, which spans the entire Michigan, has 9 HEPA chapters, and its family partner, the Daughters of Humanity, the DOP, has 8 chapters, and altogether they total over 1,000 members in Michigan. Today, the HEPA, the national HEPA, has over 400 chapters across the United States, Canada, Europe, and Australia, with over 50,000 members. In 2005, the Blueprint chapter merged with the Alpha and was renamed the Alpha Blueprint chapter. That's part of the history. The Alpha Blueprint chapter is very active, supporting the ancient ideals of Hellenism, education, individual excellence, and philanthropy. We support several community events at the Nicholas Church and also at the St. George Church, the Bluefield Hills St. George, as described in the program that you already have. We support education by offering scholarships to high school graduates and college students. The District 10 Educational Foundation has given out this year 68 scholarships to high school and college students. Wait until you hear the amount. For a total of $163,000. That's all, of course, with the support of everybody in the community and the endowment fund that the Education Foundation has. We support humanitarian relief needs during natural disasters like wildfires, hurricanes, earthquakes in the United States as well as in Greece. We promote Hellenism by celebrating the Greek national holidays like the October 28th. That's when the Greek Prime Minister was asked to surrender to the fascist forces, and he very quickly said, "Όχι," means no. And that made all the Greeks run into the streets shouting very proudly, "Freedom," and "Όχι" to fascism. So I'd like to close with this thought and turn the podium over to Dr. Michael Ariotto, our brother, who gracefully took the task to organize and coordinate this event and the lecture by Dr. Katie Jack Parks and the other panelists that we have. On the table at the end there, where the banner is, the annual banner, you can find applications and some other flyers about the HEPA in this chapter, and whoever wants more information, see me at the end, or our Secretary, John Bill, who is standing over there, by the banner. So I thank you very much for your time here, and appreciate you being here, and I'd like to welcome Dr. Michael Ariotto.
Thank you, George. I'd like to, before I introduce our keynote speaker, I'd like to tell you a little bit about where this came from. As much as I'd like to take most of the credit for it, it wasn't my idea. A few months ago when we met as a chapter, Father Paul came to our meeting as he does after a Bible study, and he and George Mortis and some of the other members talked about how we could kind of reinvigorate education back into our organizations. One of the key letters in our organization of the HAPA, and so this program, I'm going to call it a program, this is the first hopefully of many, was born. And so the idea would be is to talk about our heritage, to talk about important issues in history or of the day, and to kind of learn together. Those of you that are teachers, there's so many of you out there that are teachers. One of the most important things you do is not only teach, but also learn as we go forward. And so the spirit, if you will, of this was, we took it from a famous historian who's written many famous books by the name of Thomas Chathill. You may have known him, but he writes about what he calls the hinges of history, the important events that set forth where we are and where we've come from. He wrote 6 or so books. You may have seen his one on Greece, which is entitled Sharing the Wine Dark Sea. It talks about the contributions of the ancient Greeks to Western civilization. And when we were thinking about a topic, we could think of no other one than the importance of the Holocaust for our young people of today and for our people of today, but even more important, the role of women in society. And I am absolutely thrilled to have Dr. Katie with us. I'm just going to call you Dr. Katie. Yeah, just with us, and that she agreed to come and speak to us. And so I want to tell you a little bit about Dr. Katie, and I also want to tell you a little bit of the achievement that she has reached. She holds a doctorate or PhD in European history from Wayne State University. She specializes in the history of Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. Again, a very, very critical hinge point of history for us. She's taught numerous courses in history and in gender and sexuality and women's issues, and she works at the Holocaust Museum here, besides being a full-time mother and all sorts of other things that she does. If you're not familiar with a doctorate in history, I want to tell you a little bit about what somebody of her stature needs to go through to be awarded this degree. So you start off by taking a bachelor's degree in history, I assume, which is a 4-year degree. From there, you usually go on to a master's degree for another 2 years in specialization. Usually you write a thesis or a work of importance. But then you go on to the doctorate level where you have to take a series of classes and you have to be the best that you can be in your field and in your discipline, usually 2 or 3 subfields. After you go through these classes, you're asked to write comprehensive exams, meaning you have to write written exams and know the literature inside and out. From there, they put you on the stand and they do oral exams. It's all about exams, right? Exam. Once you become a candidate, then you have to write a book-length research on a topic that nobody has ever covered before. We call that original contribution to the discipline. Katie did this. Now I have to remember, people of my age, we were in scholarship, we fought, we ate, we lived academia. Katie did this as a full-time mother, working a second job, and taking on this type of research. And this past July, she defended her dissertation and became a newly minted scholar. What an outstanding. And on top of all that, having more women scholars is so critical. And tackling issues around women in history, which I had the opportunity, I was telling Katie, as I was preparing, I was able to take a peek at some of her lectures she's done. That's what happens when you have the internet, right? You can find out anything you can find out. And she did this outstanding lecture. I was going to watch it for, I told her, maybe 10 minutes or so. And she did it to Rochester Library. And I was so fascinated by it, I sat for the whole hour and a half, and actually I even replayed parts of it. And she made a really important statement. I mean, there's a lot of important stuff in there. I'm going to tell you, whatever you do when you get done today, go home, put your computer on, go to YouTube, and watch some of Katie's work. It's outstanding. But she talked about the importance that 50% of the population are women, yet a lot of our history books focus on the male decisions that were made. And that's such an important thing that we have to think about. And so I'm just absolutely thrilled, we have absolutely thrilled that number one, she agreed to come here, that she's our initial speaker. I'm going to ask you to come back many more times, but also to talk not only about the importance of the Holocaust and the Greek resistance, but the role of women. That as I listened to her lectures, I realized how important they were, how critical they were. They were the hinges of history. And so when she became, like I said, I was thrilled to death, and I couldn't wait for today to come. And I'm thrilled to have Dr. King here to speak to us about this important subject.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you very much for having me today. Thank you for that extremely kind introduction. It's not often that you get to do what you do for a living with your home church. So it's a really special thing for me to be able to do this with all of you today. Before we get started into a bit of the material, I'd like to start with a very short story. In 1989, historians John Roth and Michael Berenbaum wrote a very influential foundational book on reflections dealing with the Holocaust. When another historian, Carol Rittner, received her copy of the book, she called John Roth on the phone and she said, "But where are all the women?" Right? They wrote a foundational text on the Holocaust that we still use to this day to teach about this history, and yet they didn't think to include anything about women in it. This question that Carol Rittner asked, "Where are all the women?" has guided so much of my own passion for Holocaust history, and it's a little bit about what we'll be addressing today. Where are all the women? Women experienced every facet of the Holocaust. They experienced the laws that discriminated against them and their abilities to reproduce. They experienced the ghettos and the hiding. They experienced camps. They experienced the struggle through resistance, trying to survive by any means necessary. Some women, of course, also helped to perpetuate Nazi crime and aid in genocide. They voted. They served as camp guards. They served as nurses, injecting patients for sterilization. They were the ones creating comfortable homes for men in the killing fields. And yet, where are all the women in the history of the Holocaust? I argue that Carol Rittner's question is really emblematic of this larger issue surrounding Holocaust education and scholarship in broader society today. And I think a lot of it actually boils down to memory. The Holocaust has really become this prime example of not only the collection and transfer of historical memory, but the use of historical memory as a tool to not only learn from the past, but enact change in the present. We're often drawn to the number of over 6 million Jews that were murdered during the Holocaust when we study this history. 6 million people. Right? That's not something that our brains are created to even be able to comprehend that much suffering. What I always like to tell people, though, is don't focus on 6 million. Focus on one person. One person who had hopes and dreams and family and aspirations, a life that was cut short, and that happened 6 million different times for the sheer fact that those people were Jewish. And I promise you that the Nazis did not create anti-Semitism, the hatred of the Jews, and it also didn't end with World War II and the Holocaust ending. It's quite alive and well today. However, when we discuss these hatreds, when we discuss the Holocaust in general, and we talk about the history and whose stories we use to illuminate this past, whose stories are we referencing? When we think of the Holocaust, whether respect to who committed the crimes or who suffered by them, the names that often come to mind are male. And more than that, they're male perpetrators. So how are we studying the Holocaust if we're ignoring more than 50% of the people that experience these events? Critics of women's history and the study of women during the Holocaust often focus on the fact that if we study women, it actually detracts from the more fundamental fact that people were targeted as victims, not as men, women, or children, but as Jews. Other critics also talk about women's experiences being uncomfortable to discuss. They don't want to talk about the loss of menstruation or abortion or the ending of pregnancies, sexual assault, rape. They often don't want to assume that women can be violent. We are taught that, again, this is uncomfortable or taboo. But I really push you to think, if we can talk about the dehumanization of over 6 million people, why can we also not talk about this? We should be talking about women's issues, and we have to move away from this idea that everybody endured the Holocaust in the same way. Both men and women had a variety of different experiences during the Holocaust, and both are valid and both are integral in understanding what happened during this period. The denial of difference, unfortunately, does nothing to help any of us or help our future generations understand the Holocaust. And we can certainly not silence the stories of victims and survivors because of mere sexism that is still present today. So while this is a very big and complicated history, I think it's first important to define what was the Holocaust, right? When we use that word, what does it actually mean? The Holocaust was the systematic, bureaucratic, and state-sponsored persecution and mass murder of the European Jews, over 6 million of them by Nazi Germany and their collaborators between 1933 and 1945. Well, that's a very sort of convoluted kind of definition. The part I want you to focus on is the state-sponsored part. This was all legal. The Nazis were able to co-opt an entire society through their military, their police, their law, their medicine, and they were legally able to enact genocide. That's how this happened. That's how the Holocaust was able to be perpetuated. The Holocaust was, of course, a genocide in which the Jewish people were targeted for complete extermination, the only group of people to be targeted for extermination. Now, there were certainly other groups of people that were also targeted by the Nazi regime that suffered greatly at the hands of the Nazis and the Germans. Unfortunately, though, the Jews are the only group that are classified for extermination, which is why the word Holocaust, meaning burnt offering in Greek, applies only to the Jewish people. Once Adolf Hitler and the Nazis come to power in 1933, legally come to power in 1933, they are voted in, they start quickly enacting anti-Jewish legislation aimed at shrinking Jewish lives. Jews can't ride a bicycle anymore. Jews can't go to the movie theater. Jews can't sit on the same benches. Jews can't marry non-Jews. All of these things targeted the Jewish people, but of course they still prevailed spiritually. Then, of course, with the start of World War II in 1939, life became unbearable not only for Jews just in Germany, but for Jews all over Europe and the globe. Greece, of course, was then invaded in 1940 and fought valiantly. And I say that as a historian, not as a Greek who is a little bit biased, but genuinely, Greece is one of the sort of bright spots in the Holocaust of people that actually fought back against the Nazis. Of course, we celebrate Ohi Day tomorrow for this very fact. There are many, many countries that the Nazis relied on collaboration in order to be able to take over that country, and Greece said no. They were one of the very only countries that did so. Some of the more famous battles, of course, being the Battle of Crete, where men, women, and children fought by any means necessary against the Germans to defend their homeland. Women were literally fighting with kitchen utensils to defend their families. Actually, the Battle of Crete is considered to be one of the largest casualties of German troops during this period, around 4,000 of them being murdered during this period. There were 1,000 women that were murdered during this battle as well, of course, fighting back. When the forces again entered a country, they really relied on this kind of cooperation in order to take over. And even though the Germans wanted the Greeks to surrender, they didn't do so willingly, but of course were eventually forced to, and they sustained great casualties to their resistance as a result. During this time period in Greece, there were roughly 77,000 Jews living in the country. So these were the Jews that were, of course, targeted for extermination. The largest pocket of Jews in the entire country was in Salonika in northern Greece, with about 43,000 Greek Jews that lived in that area. There were a total of 60,000 Greek Jews that were murdered during the Holocaust. 60,000 of 77,000 people, that's over 80% of their pre-war population was decimated. That's 40,000 people from Salonika, right? That leaves 3,000 survivors from that area. There are 800 people murdered from Athens, 2,000 from the island of Corfu, and another 2,000 from the island of Rhodes. You'll hear me say murdered and not perished. There are so many things that you'll look up on the internet that say that the Jews perished. They didn't just fall off the face of the planet. right? They didn't just stop existing one day. They were actively murdered by other people that chose not to see them as people, right? A very good lesson, and perhaps for today's times as well, to treat your neighbor as a human being first before anything else. The Salonika Jews, of course, were attacked in such a large sum because there were 2 ghettos, enclosed areas where Jews could not leave, portions of cities that were created in that area. And between 1943, March 20th to August 19th, 40,000 of them were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, which was the largest of the concentration and death camps that murdered over 1.1 million Jews there. And that's where the Greek Jews were murdered. Thousands of people, though, very few thousand of people, survived by hiding with people that took pity on them, friends, or by joining the partisan resistance. Partisans being people that were resistance fighters, sort of guerrilla warfare, you can think in that nature, people that chose to fight back that had the means to do so. Typically, though, women that joined the partisan units were able to do so because they didn't look stereotypically Jewish, and so they could travel around cities from island to island almost in plain sight, because God forbid anybody think that a woman was actually doing anything. They also were typically women that didn't have ties to family. What I mean by that is that not that they didn't have family. A lot of them, their family had already been murdered at this point. They typically didn't have children with them anymore. They had maybe elderly parents, but their parents were able to be hidden by other people. And so they were able to do these very courageous acts without perhaps worry of people at home. When thinking about the different experiences of these women that resisted during this period, Mary Feldsteiner was a historian who was really a pioneer in looking at women's experiences during the Holocaust. And she said that although all Jews faced the same ultimate fate during the Holocaust, along the stations toward extinction, each gender lived its own journey. That's why you can't just say that Jews were murdered during the Holocaust. Right? It may have been, unfortunately, the same end result, but the way that they lived was very, very different before they died. Understanding this, I think, I argue, is actually not an alternative perspective. It is the perspective, right? This is the Holocaust. It's not the Holocaust and then women in the Holocaust. It's just the Holocaust. And we have to incorporate these stories to make sure that we remember not only their memory and do them service, but to be able to learn from them and learn in the present as well. So while we certainly won't get to everything today, it's a very, very large topic, I'd like to highlight some female resistance today to talk about female agency and how some women experienced the Holocaust. When specifically looking at women's resistance, it's important to remember that women resisted in every single manner that men did during the Holocaust. Let me say that again. Women resisted in every single manner that men did during the Holocaust. Women resisted as college students, as mothers, as couriers and partisans fighting. They resisted as prisoners in the camps. These are certainly not the only categories of ways that women resisted, but it gives you a little bit of sampling of the opportunities that women were given to be able to resist. When we talk about resistance actions, they typically fall into 2 different categories, although they are equally important. Not often seen that way, but they are. The first is spiritual or cultural resistance, right? This is any act of opposition that originated or found expression in culture, in traditions, in keeping with religious practices, anything that could undermine the Nazis' authority by keeping the human spirit alive. This could be writing poetry, creating arts, practicing your religion, going to school. All of these things that might seem small in the scale of the Holocaust were actually quite large and very, very important to the resistance movement. There's a Holocaust survivor that I know that said that hope was the most dangerous tool that was used during the Holocaust. Not weapons, not anything else, it was hope. Because the Nazis could use hope against the Jewish people so that they could try and do anything that they said so that they might survive, but it was also a very powerful tool for resistance as well. The other category is, of course, physical or armed resistance. These are acts of opposition or defiance that were meant to sabotage the Nazi regime, of course, through things like traditional battles, or any kind of attacks, warfare. This typically includes anything that the partisans did working in the forest, or in the case of Greece, in the mountains. And these, of course, were activities that were not necessarily going to work, right? These people didn't think that they were going to overthrow the entire Nazi regime, but they were going to fight back, no matter what. Jews were a part of every major uprising during the Holocaust, and even Greek Jews as well, in Warsaw and Auschwitz. These infamous battles that we hear about, Greek Jews were a part of these. And the acts of resistance by Jewish people during the Holocaust really varied by condition, and by year, and by place, and really that was all dependent on what people could even do to resist in those periods. Greek resistance was, of course, one of the strongest resistance movements in Nazi-occupied Europe, and women participated in every single area of that resistance. Partisans operated from bases in the mountains using guerrilla warfare tactics, ambushes, and they were aided by the local towns, which was not normal, right? Because partisans were typically not welcome in other areas throughout Europe because the townspeople, unfortunately, were collaborating with the regime, but not the Greeks. What's also interesting is that the partisan movement was actually one that was welcoming to Jewish people during this period. So if you look at partisans in Poland or in some of the other countries, they were actually not welcoming Jews among their ranks. It's important to remember that while the Nazis were targeting the Jews during the Holocaust for extermination, they were certainly also invading other countries and not welcomed by the people that are living there. So some people became partisans just out of dislike for the Nazis, not because of an existential threat to their people. But they often, as a result, had anti-Semitism that was rampant among the partisans. But in Greece, partisan units welcomed Greek Jews as their own people, which was very, very unheard of at the time period. There were as many as 600 Jews that joined LS, the Greek People's Liberation Army, which was the left-wing force group of partisans during the period. And they operated in every single capacity because, again, they were welcomed in a way that they were not in other partisan units. During World War II, there were approximately 30,000 Jews that escaped the ghettos and work camps that formed these sort of organized resistance partisan groups. They worked in a range of duties. Women, of course, were put to do domestic duties, but of course they're also working with artillery, and they're doing reconnaissance, and they're working in a very, very violent capacity that typically women are not considered to be able to do. Many women partisans actually say that guns were the law of the forest, and guns belonged to men. Despite the twin evils of anti-Semitic and sexist violence that threatened women within these groups, they overcame these compounded dangers in order to resist during the Holocaust, which is really quite amazing. When teaching about the Holocaust, I think it's really, again, it's impossible to grasp the enormity of how big these events were. I think that's why it's always important to focus on individual people. Right? By focusing on these individual stories, it takes this very large history and it boils it down to one person. How did one person survive the Holocaust? How did one person resist? And how did their life, how was it impacted by these events? So I would like to introduce you to our first story that we'll be hearing today, a woman named Sarah Fortes. She was born in Zareka, Yehoshua, and she was born in 1927 in Halikas, a small town near Athens. She never knew her father, who passed away when she was about 2 months old, but she and her younger sister were raised by their mother and had a very happy childhood. Although she identified as being 100% Greek, they also celebrated being Jewish by lighting candles every Sabbath and attending temple on high holidays. So again, they considered themselves to be 100% Greek. Sarah knew, of course, it was time to leave her hometown in 1941 when the Germans arrived. She had heard terrible stories, like many other people, that the Jews in smaller parts of Greece never returned. Sarah and her mother escaped to a small village, and they were hid there for a short while, but then the people of the town had told her that you have to leave. We'll hide your mother, we'll take care of her, you have to escape to the mountains. And so leaving her mother, which I can't even imagine doing, Sarah decided to become an andarte, which was a resistance fighter, and she wanted to play a significant role. She had unbelievable determination. She went from village to village to village, trying to recruit young women and turning them from young women into soldiers. Sarah formed a band of female partisans that became indispensable to male fighters, transforming these young village girls really into women. On their first mission, they were ordered to throw Molotov cocktails to distract the enemy so the partisans could move forward and attack. Fortis is noted saying that fear was not in my vocabulary. Impressed by her skills, many of the male partisans invited her all-female group to join into their missions. They burned houses down, they executed Nazi collaborators, they aided men in any way that they possibly could. Very unique to this time period, that women had not done this before in battle. The male andartes, though, however, were given credit for many of the missions that women completed, because of course it was unfathomable that women could actually accomplish such acts. Often, the women were forced to sleep to men next to men within the forest, and Sarah was constantly worried about the women's safety. For women, during every single stage of the Holocaust, they had this dual fear of not only the enemy, but also internally, because they had to fear sexual violence as well. She became so prominent within the resistance movement in Greece that she was actually, at age only 18 years old, considered Captain Savika. The Nazis at one point sent an informer to try to capture her, but they mistakenly arrested her cousin, brutally attacked her as ways that I'm sure we can all understand how, and vowing revenge, she tracked down this informer and executed them herself. After the war, the Andartes in Greece fell out of favor with the new Greek government because they had ties to communism, and so Sarah was arrested. But owing to her great reputation, she was released shortly after, where she then immigrated to Israel, met her husband, and settled down. Sarah and many other female partisans, though, of the time, recall their resistance activities with fierce pride, regardless of the lack of recognition that they received after the war. And she was just one of many, many women that did these exact same kind of actions. Along with Greek Jewish women who resisted during the Holocaust, there were also, of course, non-Jewish women in Greece that tried to help them. Sophia Kritikou, that you see her picture here, is one of those women. She was a single mother who worked as a housekeeper, a cleaner in Athens, where she lived with her daughter Agapi. In September of 1943, with the German occupation of Athens, the Jews, of course, began being persecuted in the capital. One day in March, there were rumors all throughout the city that there would be rations given to Jewish people if they went to the central synagogue. Of course, the Nazis used this as a way of rounding people up. And the Kaczynski family sent their mother and their 2 aunts to get some of this food, and they never returned. Their family later learned that they were subsequently deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau and murdered there. Following their disappearance, the father of the family, David, who was still responsible for their 18-year-old son, Zvi, their 16-year-old daughter, Liana, and their 8-year-old daughter, Jenny, went into hiding. But they had false identity cards bearing Greek Orthodox names that they had been issued by police commanders in their residential quarters, so for the time being, they were safe. This also shows you more Greek resistance, right? Many of us may be familiar with Archbishop Father Damaskinos, who was the bishop of Athens in Greece, who very, very valiantly fought to give all Jews in the area Greek Orthodox birth certificates, saying that these people were not Jews, they were Greeks. Of course, during this period, though, Father Damaskinos was targeted by the Nazis and was told that if you do not try to stop speaking out against us, then we're going to shoot you. Right? Pretty standard response from the Nazis. He then, of course, wrote a letter back saying, in the Greek Orthodox tradition, our bishops are hung and not shot. Please respect our traditions. Father Damaskinos, of course, survived the war because they were too worried about making a martyr out of him. And so this is how the Kaczynski family had these Greek Orthodox papers. At first, they were able to find a temporary shelter with the father paying for their shelter. Again, think of people profiting off of these people that have lost everything. But of course, he knew that he had to find a more permanent solution. And so he owned a sewing workshop, and his partner of the sewing workshop said, I know this lady named Sophia Kritikou. She's a single mother, which might be a problem, right? Because of course, single mothers at the time were not welcome in Greece. So you could see how a woman like this might be able to relate to other people that were being persecuted. And the partner of the sewing workshop actually happened to be Sophia's daughter, Agapi's Nonot. And so the Kaczynski family ended up going to live with Sophia, she harbored this entire family. She was a hardworking and poor woman, and she did not hesitate to extend her hospitality to these people that needed it, to hide them in her home. At first, she actually didn't know that they were Jewish. When she found out that they were Jewish, she did nothing, because there were still people that needed help. And so she still hid them in her home, even though the penalty, of course, would have been execution for not only herself, but her daughter and anybody else involved. The Kaczynskis were able to find shelter in Sophia Kritikou's home until the end of the war. The oldest son, Zvi, that I mentioned, that was 18 years old, at one point left to join the partisan movement. But he would come back quite often to be able to visit the family whenever he could. After the war, he ended up actually coming back to be able to visit the woman that rescued him so many years later. And in 1964, he once met again the daughter Agapi, and they fell in love and married, and she ended up converting to Judaism, and they moved to Israel. Sophia then went to live with her daughter and her son-in-law in Israel, and she died in 1995 at the age of 100 years old. On August 23rd of 1998, Yad Vashem recognized Sophia Kritikou as righteous among the nations. Yad Vashem is the main Holocaust memorial in Israel, and righteous among the nations is a title that is extremely important in Jewish culture. It's a title that's given to non-Jewish people that helped the Jews during World War II. These people could not get anything in return. You couldn't have done it for money, or for social gain, or for any other purpose, other than because it was the right thing to do. It was morally and ethically right. And this is actually a really difficult distinction to get. There are only about 24,000 people in the world that have this distinction, because you have to have verbal testimony, proving that you helped people, written documents and testimony, which often many people after the war didn't have. So again, this is very difficult criteria. I had somebody say to me once that they were surprised that most of the righteous among the nations were women. I have to tell you, it's not surprising to me at all. It's not surprising that women who are taught to put other people before them at all costs, that they would continue doing so even during hardships like the Holocaust. There are 364 Greeks, most of them women, that are recognized as righteous among the nations, which I think is a really, really beautiful thing. Greek Jews and non-Jewish women performed truly heroic deeds during the Holocaust amidst unthinkable peril and destruction. There are so many stories that you could pick about to talk about women during the Holocaust. You could talk about the Jewish mothers that walked with their children to the gas chambers. You could talk about the grandmothers that took the children so that their daughters might be able to work and survive another day to have more children at another point. People don't often read these things as resistance, but that is resistance, plain and simple. There are also Greek Jews, again, that helped in every single major uprising during the Holocaust. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the Auschwitz-Birkenau Uprising, all of these things Greek Jews were a part of. They resisted also just by surviving in the camps. There are over 44,000 sites of incarceration during the Holocaust, between ghettos to concentration and labor camps, to of course the notorious 6 main death camps in Poland. There are millions of stories that you could pick to talk about women in the Holocaust, and quite frankly, that's the point. Their stories are accessible, they're everywhere, and they shouldn't just be read as a footnote in the history of the rest of the Holocaust. Their stories should be taught in schools and university classrooms, be on the cover of books, on the walls of museums, and they should be part of the main narrative of the Holocaust. Because when we teach about women's history, it benefits all of us. History, women's history is history, right? Or herstory, as I quite prefer. Their experiences and nuances of gender are important, and they're necessary if we want our people to study and understand the past and its implications on the present. So thank you very much.
Dr. Katie, thank you so much for your thoughts and ideas on not only the Holocaust, but the role of women in the Holocaust. We actually have a distinguished panel of people together that I'd like to entertain the discussion and also entertain questions from all of you. But let me just take a moment to introduce the panel. We have John from our church. John's family has been instrumental in Greek politics and in the Greek diplomatic service, and his relatives were involved in the resistance movement in the Second World War in Greece. Daniel Janelle's grandparents were Greek Jews, and he lost members of his family during the Holocaust, so he's got a very unique perspective on this. And then Nick Phillips is kind of our historian, if you will, of anything Greek and Mediterranean, has been involved with a lot of things within our communities moving forward. So maybe Katie, I'm going to ask our panel for some of their thoughts in a minute, but maybe as a way to start, I'm interested as I listen to you talk about the importance of the Holocaust and women in the Holocaust. A few years back, I think it's more than a few years, David Christian from Australia talked about big history, you know, and you're probably familiar with his work on maps of time and origins. But he said, you know, the way we look at history as a bunch of compartmental time frames, we're losing the idea of tendencies and trends in history. And actually, he's one of the ones theoretically that launched the big data movement. If you do anything with data analytics and business or anything about the idea of trends. And so Bill Gates did a number of TED Talks on this. I'm interested in the importance of the Holocaust and women in the Holocaust for big history. One of the fears I have of history is we tend to forget. As the generations pass that have experienced it, we tend to forget what happened. I've been reading more of this around the First World War, now that we've almost lost all our veterans in that war, now soon in the Second War. What is the role of the Holocaust and women in the Holocaust for big history? And you talked about, obviously, teaching it, putting it in our historical museum walls. What else would you recommend that we never forget and we keep true to the main themes that we as humans have faced in history?
Thank you. That's a very big question, a very good question. I would argue that, again, if we're not looking at women's history as a part of this larger understanding of the Holocaust, then you might as well just call it Men in the Holocaust, because that's what you're studying, right? My dissertation is actually looking at all the major Holocaust museums in the United States and how their exhibits do or do not display issues of women's experiences. And spoiler alert, it's not very good. And so as a result of that, our museum here in Farmington Hills, Michigan, just did a massive $30 million renovation of our exhibit, with one of the core issues being to rectify this issue of women's experiences, making sure that women's stories were put back on the walls. So the reason that we have to do this is if we boil down all of the history of the Holocaust into this very sort of small understanding that every single person was in a ghetto, and then they went to a camp, which was probably Auschwitz, and that's where they were murdered, and that was it. We miss the nuance of understanding how people, not how they died during this period, but how they lived. And making sure that women's voices are heard in that same exact conversation helps us understand that there are a lot of differences of what women experienced during this period. They were targeted as women. It was not a byproduct, right? It was deliberate. And so if we can learn from this in the past, then we can certainly learn how to not continue doing that in the present. We can learn when we see current genocides to understand how they're going to attack women and how we can perhaps as an international community try to help that. And so making sure that this big history, that women are included in it, is absolutely necessary to make sure that you're actually having an accurate account of what happened in the Holocaust, or again, you're just learning about men in the Holocaust, which is equally important, but the point is that it's equal.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to one of our panelists. Daniel, I'm going to call on you first. And it's interesting, by the time I got a little time to spend with Daniel, I think of us sometimes as Greek Americans, and we all think as Greek Americans, well, we're Orthodox. And we forget about the Jewish people that were in Salonika, those that came after the Reconquista from Spain and lived among us. Daniel, you have a unique perspective. Tell us a little bit more about your grandparents. I mean, what was their view of history? What was their view, maybe, and your descendants' view of this Holocaust? And what does it mean to you and your family?
Thank you. So I come from a family of partly Greek Jews who were from Yanina. And thankfully, my grandparents had immigrated here through Ellis Island around the turn of the century, but obviously had family members who were still back in Yanina. And they were deported by the Nazis in 1944, and they were sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau and murdered. I don't know, but I hope that they were part of the resistance, but I don't have information on that. But one thing that I find, I grew up always kind of connecting with my Greek roots, and I feel like part of why I'm chosen is now to be part of this church and find my way here. So the Jews are the chosen people, and I kind of feel honored to have been chosen in that way. But I will say that I always connected. My papa always, fed me Greek food and always talked about how wonderful his Greek parents were, and they would be in the community and they were dancing, and when I was talking with John before, people in Yanina, they had been there since 900 AD or earlier, so we were Roman yoke Jews. We weren't, my family actually wasn't Sephardic, and so I do have a lot of Ashkenazi Jews on my other side of the family, but the Roman Yotes had been there for a long time, thousands of years, and they felt they were 100% Greek. So even though they'd go to synagogue on Saturday instead of church on Sunday, they felt like they were fully Greek. And as John had pointed out, and I didn't even realize, a lot of them felt safe to stay in Yanina because they felt, oh, we'll be protected, we're Greek, we're not like the other Jews that they'll notice and take. And so that was obviously a big, unfortunate, miscalculation to not get out of there. But I did have the privilege of going in 2013 to my cousin's bar mitzvah, actually, in the synagogue in Yanina, in the old city. And our family name, Abraham or Avram, is on the wall. It's engraved there. It's with a lot of the other community members who were taken by the Nazis and deported. So it's ironically the Greek side is the only Jewish family I have I can prove actually were taken in the Holocaust. And so it's even more meaningful to me. But that synagogue is very special, and it's interesting because my papa would always, and kind of to close up, my papa would always, during Passover Seder would, my family would always put like a red egg on the Seder plate. I said, why is it red? And he said, well, that's what we do. And then we'd crack the red eggs together. And I didn't know any different. And then I came here and I'm like, wait, you guys do that too? So it really is. I mean, if anything is shown, we felt 100% Greek, our family, since way back. So I wish I had more, historical knowledge from my family. Obviously, that was the side that had broken away before they immigrated. But I guess I had that unique perspective to have been from there and have my family in the Holocaust. So thank you, Dr. Katie, for all that. This is great.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you. I'd like to ask Yanni a question. As Dr. Katie was presenting her materials, and we always talk about this at this time of the year, how in the darkest period of World War II in the 1940s, when, if you think about it, all the major European powers, except for the UK, collapsed to Nazism. And the UK was, of course, under struggle during the Battle of Britain. The Greeks were the ones who were able to stand up. And in some ways, the resistance began with the Greeks in 1940. It's such an important thing. Yanni, being a student of Greek history and Greek culture, how important is this? When we get back to the issue of big history, how important were the Greeks in turning the hinges of the war during this early period?
Well, I can speak as a historian here. I can only speak from my personal experience of what I read. And I want to get back to Fred Daniel here, since we have common roots from Ioannina and from me, because there's a couple of others here too, by the way. But anyway, I think we Greeks have liberty in our heart and in our soul. That's why it's very hard for the Greeks to be suppressed by some other power. I see that in everyday life, in my lifetime. And of course, I heard it also from my grandparents and parents. So I think we came out of 350 years of Ottoman rule, especially in the region of Epirus in 1912, 1913. So 1940 is just a couple of years later, practically. People were not going to take an occupation, a German occupation that easily. I think that's from my translation and why we immediately resist in such cases. We were, of course, not the only ones in the Balkans. There was the Yugoslav resistance was also very, very strong, gave the Wehrmacht a very hard time. That's why the Germans had to go around Romania and Bulgaria to invade Greece and couldn't go through Serbia and the rest of Yugoslavia. But we played a big role. That's actually, I don't know if most people or most historians don't always make that point. For example, the Battle of Crete, as Kate, by the way, thank you, Kate, for this beautiful lecture here, and very informative. The Battle of Crete was very important because the whole parachute regiment of Germany was destroyed, and they thought they were going to take over Crete and go on to Stalingrad, and maybe the turnout of the war would be totally different if the parachutists would have ended up in Stalingrad, and maybe would have been the Soviet resistance. So in this sense, it's of course very, very important, and we don't want to go into Churchill talking about the Greeks fighting like heroes, but the heroes fighting like Greeks, etc. Now, I want to say a couple of other things. So I'm from, my parents are from Ioannina, I'm from Epirus, and I also happen to be the president of the Pan-Patriotic Federation here, which in the US has brought me together with a lot of Romanian Jews. So I want to make a point between the Romanian Jews and the other Jews in Greece. The Sephardic Jews came in the 15th century. The Romanian Jews actually go back, as we said, around 900, but even maybe before that. There's actually menorahs depicted in Dodoni, if you go to the ancient city of Dodoni. They're not sure if they were just merchants who were coming and they had a temple. They actually had a Jewish temple in Dodoni. So there were for sure Jewish settlements over 2,500 years ago in the region of Epirus. And it's also peculiar, exactly as Daniel said, that those Romanian Jews spoke only Greek. They were for thousands of years there. They did not have a second, let's say, dialect, like the Ashkenazi spoke Yiddish, which is a German and Hebrew dialect, or the Sephardic spoke Ladino, which is a Spanish, let's say, Hebrew dialect. The Romanians felt totally Greek for hundreds and hundreds of years. And in the case of the Holocaust or the Shoah, it put them to sleep, although they saw that in Thessaloniki. They're gathering the Sephardic Jews. I've had this discussion with the former mayor of Ioannina, and he started crying himself. So this was just a couple of years ago. And he said that actually the rabbi in Ioannina, together with the two elderly community leaders, said, we don't have to worry. and did not warn the community to disperse, thinking that they're going to be spared because the Germans were not going to touch them because they were being Greek in quotations. So going to the former mayor of Ioannina, it shows how much the Romanians were accepted as really Yaniotes. Ioannina was in the 20th century the first city in Greece that voted a Jewish mayor 6 years ago. Unfortunately, Moises Elisaf passed away from cancer 2 years ago. I had the honor to speak with him and talk with him many times. We also had an event during the pandemic, a Zoom event where we talked about it together with the Niakos Foundation in Los Angeles about it was a whole week event about the Jews of Greece, about the different communities of Rhodes and of Kerkira, Kefalonia, of course the Sephardic Jews of Thessaloniki, and one day was dedicated to the Roman Jews of Ioannina. It's on YouTube, maybe you can go and see it. It's very interesting also what Moises Elisaf, that then acted mayor, said about the Roman Jews. So I can't say much about the woman's role in the resistance, but Moises Elisaf again told me about his parents who joined the Greek resistance. My two grandparents were both in the resistance. They were with the other resistance movement, and his parents were with us. And his mother took part in many resistance battles. His father was rather in more like communications and stuff like that. And they were then helped by non-Jewish Greeks to be sheltered in Evia, and then from Evia took a boat and went down to Crete, and from Crete to Palestine. And his parents survived in the kibbutz in Palestine, and proved that there were such vivid Yaniotes in 1948, although they could have stayed in what then became Israel or gone to the US where most of their relatives went. They chose to go back to Ioannina, rebuild their house, rebuild their business, and Moises Elisaf was born in the 50s in Ioannina, growing up as a Yaniote, a Jewish Yaniote, and became a doctor, became a professor of medicine at the University of Ioannina, was very active in the city, was very well respected in the city, and that's how he became. He was elected democratically mayor. And mind you that there were maybe 20 Jewish families remaining in Ioannina, so it was not because he was Jewish that he was it was despite that he was Jewish. So this is a bit of the Romanian history. Then again, with Daniel, I don't want to monopolize the discussion here. We again discussed about Kehila Kedosha. It's the Yaniote synagogue in New York. He was visited. I have good relations. It's a synagogue that was organized, I think, in 1920 or 1921 from Yaniotes, Jews who came over. His ancestors from his mother's side were part of it. I have to say, it's just a short story here, and I'll keep it here. My sister studied in 1982 to 1986, did her pre-med in NYU, and one day she was walking down the Lower East Side in the Jewish neighborhood, and suddenly she heard Greek. And she started talking with two old ladies, and they told her, oh, we're Jews from Larissa, and we have a Jewish synagogue here, etc. So that's how she started going and made some friends there. And now comes the last note. My grandfather, from my mother's side, was in Auschwitz. He was in the resistance movement. He was imprisoned. He was imprisoned on April 25th, 1943, coming out on Megalik Penti on Green Thursday, coming out of the church. He was denounced by a guy called Nicolas Delas, which we found out later. And he was taken to Auschwitz. He survived Auschwitz, was liberated by the Soviet army, coming back to Greece in 1946 with tuberculosis and pretty much very, very sick, only to be killed by the communists in the Civil War a couple of months later for a story that we don't even want to talk about here. So this is Greece, lots of history, especially Peter's, lots of history, and not pleasant history. That's all. I have other times to talk about, I don't know.
Thank you, Daniel. to get the word out about the Holocaust and the women in the Holocaust. Nick, you're connected so well with the Greek community. How can we help Dr. Katie and support her in her mission? While Dr. Katie can do numerous things, I'm sure she could use our help and support as we go forward. What would be your thoughts if this was asked of you, of how we could continue to get the word out about this piece of great history?
For sure. First off, if I can start with Dr. Katie, very impressive, your accomplishments. Very informative, very interesting, to say the least. We got to thank also Mike's family. They're so pillar of this church. Thank you so much for this event, and for the Yoga Fest, highlighting the culture, and etc. If I could also mention, I'm also from an Italian Greek family, and unlike Mike's family, our arguments were, is pasta visual better than moussaka, or is cannolis better than baklava? So that's what our arguments were. So with that, also if I can mention, my grandfather came from Leros. That was the Battle of Leros. Was the Italian Navy was based on Leros. And for the older individuals, Guns of Navarone movie, that highlighted the battle. But Hollywood put the cannons up in the mountains. The cannons weren't in the mountains. But my grandfather came from Leros. His sister, Marika, cleaned the old St. Nick's in Highland Park. She was stuck in north of Athens with her two daughters who are still with us, Thea Irene and Thea Dee. And I think I have a hard day when my boss yells at me or I make a mistake or something like that. Aunt Dee was born, she was only 12 years old. She had U.S. papers, and she was on the list, even though she was 12 years old. Luckily, we had a verbose great uncle. He was the Greek ambassador to Egypt. He spoke 7 languages. He told the Germans, please leave her alone. She's only 12 years old. So that's what saved her. But again, what they went through, the Germans every day would come and take the eggs, the chickens, the milk, whatever vegetables, little vegetables they had, they took. So there's a couple things there for everybody. But with that, I've got connections. I've got to speak to you, Doctor. I've got connections with the National Herald. Maybe the National Herald can do a write-up on something that you're working on, or highlight your new display. And then I'm also behind Molly Stop, the Facebook Molly Stop page. So maybe we can highlight some stuff there for you. Yeah.
We have a few moments for questions. Just before I do that though, I want to let you know of a couple that unfortunately couldn't be with us, but Peter and Lisa Drosos. Peter was involved with the museum and helped selecting some of the pictures of the Greeks that helped in the Holocaust and led to resistance. They're more advanced in age, but they're a fascinating couple. Spent time in Europe and worked for the government. Lisa was worked and was a sub-director for a long time at Dumbarton Oaks. You may know that that organization is one of the foremost Byzantine institutes in the United States. So, Father?
Just a small comment. We mentioned the role of women. We have today with us Olga Tekos. Is Olga still here? Yes. Olga, come and give us a little love for the museum.
Oh my goodness.
Olga, because of all these beautiful things, you see these placards, they came from the Hellenic Museum here in Detroit. Because of Olga.
Thank you, Father. Welcome, everyone. I have to commend St. Nicholas. Of course, it's in my heart because this was my church when it was back at 6 in Woodbury. And I appreciate so much when the organizations come together and they have such unity and we work together that way, because the Greeks need to do that and take a lot of lessons from the Jewish community and work together in education. And what a beautiful and inspiring lecture you gave. Thank you so much. And hopefully this will open the door to many to come. I have just recently been appointed the museum event coordinator downtown. And many of you have visited. So I look forward to some of these lectures not only taking place there, but the film festival that my mother-in-law is very passionate about. And with a lot of the leaders of each of the organizations getting together, and I commend the Cretan Society, they do such a wonderful job. But Father, you embracing a Heba is something that I haven't seen in a long time. And I was telling the group this church is not only in my heart, but it is one of the pillars. And every time I come, there's so much progress and so much love here that it embraces newcomers. And every time I come in the door, people will come and say hello, which isn't something that's done in a lot of the churches. So I recently visited the museum in Chicago, and they have a wonderful, wonderful progressive Greek heritage pride. And also I was in Portland, Oregon, and they have a beautiful museum as well. And we can share some of the exhibits. And thank you so much. We have the last thing I want to say is there's right now we're doing a HEPA has graciously given $20,000 to the museum, and it's a match for the month of October. And if we raise another, actually it's 30,000 from other organizations, 10,000 came from. So if we raise 30,000 in the month of October, they will match 30,000 for us. So this is many of matches to come, hopefully. And we're almost there. We're $2,000 short. And I thank the Philoptochos of St. Nicholas and Andrea Fellis and the president of the, thank you so very much. Your contributions are allowing our museum downtown to not only flourish, but to bring these lectures, and hopefully we can expose it to more people. And I know that it's taped, so maybe we can have this tape showing with some visual aids down at the museum. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lynn.
Maybe for the few moments we have left, are there any questions for Dr. Katie? Does anybody want? What's that? You're giving me a workout here, go back and forth.
Okay, thank you. You have a wonderful way of speaking. So fluid, so detailed. And, well, I have two questions, and then the second one is a double question. The first one I want to ask you is, what was it like for you going into studying the Holocaust and finding out that Greece, as a nation, was a positive force in helping families, people, in preservation, all of those things, risking their lives? What was that like for you personally? And then the other thing is, we don't think about this. We don't train ourselves to think about what if it could be us. And there's an element of survival that this long out of World War II, we don't really know what that feels like. And also the preservation of our traditions. So in studying these women, and you were comparing women to men without really saying it, who do you think did, there's that preservation of yourself and your family, preservation of your traditions. Where was the female mind in that, maybe compared to the male?
Well, thank you very much. I think it's, every time I give a talk like this, typically somebody raises their hand at the end and says, so as a Jewish person, do you believe? And I always have to, nicely remind them that I'm actually not Jewish, that people that are not Jewish can also care about Jewish people, and that you don't have to be of a group of people to care about a group of people.
So this was interesting though, when I was, in school for this and working at the Holocaust Museum. It's something that is typically surprising to people, but I'll tell you a really cute, sweet story. It's very short. There's a survivor that speaks at our museum regularly, and I was doing a program with her once, and she said, "Oh, are you Sephardic?" And I said, "Oh no, I'm dark, but I'm Greek." And she goes, "Oh, one of my best friends growing up was Greek. Her name was Catherine Malice." And I was like, "Catherine Malice, I know the Malice family." And she was so sweet. She goes, "You know what? I loved Catherine because she didn't care that I was a Jew, and I didn't care that she was Greek." And it was just this really sweet moment that, again, you don't have to be of a people to care about a people. And I think that we could use a little bit more of that. In response to your question about sort of documenting culture, women did this in a variety of really interesting ways. Of course, men did also, but women in particular, most historians believe that they actually fared better in the concentration and death camps because they were typically used to more communal resources, right? They were used to things like, our version of Holocaust, right? They were used to that. And so there are many women within camps that did things like created cookbooks. And it's not that they were creating cookbooks because they were hungry, right? They were creating cookbooks because how do you remember your yaya? You make her food and you talk about her while you're making it, and that's how you preserve culture and memory and traditions and people. And so that's how many of these women within these spaces would do that, and in many respects, they were contributing to keeping that culture alive. There's also so many women that documented life within the ghettos. They documented life not as just mothers, but how adaptable women were able to be in this period because they had to. And women have always done what they had to do. And so I've always been very inspired by that.
Additional questions? Yes.
No, just a comment. One comment. On the topic of Holocaust, a lot of historians state that per population, capital population, Greece was the country that saved more Jews. And not too many people know that, so I just want to mention it.
Thank you. Other questions?
I'm from Calavrita, nearby Calavrita, and the massacre of Calavrita was a huge, where they lined up, I think, almost 1,400 men and boys from the age of 13 to, 80, and they shot them. A lot of the women were left behind, and they dressed their boys like girls at that time in order to survive that. So a lot of the women had nobody to marry because all these boys were killed at that time. So the neighboring cities were, surrounded by some of the boys that survived. And I don't know if you probably are familiar, there's a beautiful museum there that you cannot, it's almost like our Holocaust museum where it names all the boys and their age by the 1,400 of them. Have you been to Greece and have you visited?
I've been to Greece, but I haven't been to that museum.
Okay, it's a very moving area, because they came through our village twice, and they did burn the priest and the teacher in the Times Square. So that was.
Thank you.
It's like a lot of fun.
Yanni.
I just want to say one more thing. Dr. Parks said in the beginning that we should not forget and learn from history. Unfortunately, history sometimes repeats itself. I follow the German politics very, very close. I've studied in Germany, have the privilege of speaking very good German. And there is a neo-Nazi party coming up in Germany in the last 2 years, the Alternative for Germany, AfD. 4 weeks ago, they became the strongest party in the state of Sachsen-Anhalt. It's very interesting that it is the same state that in 1933 the Nazi party became first in any other state in the Reich. So in Brandenburg 2 weeks ago, the AfD became first party also, but they don't have a chance of building a government because all the other parties made a coalition against it. So neo-Nazism is coming back in Germany, unfortunately, and there is things happening in Europe that we have to keep an eye on, with Orban coming from a neo-Nazi party in Hungary, with the Ustasha building a party in the Ukraine, which was the movement, the Nazi movement under the Nazi, when the Germany occupied Croatia. Ustasha was actually the collaborating party, and the Azov in Ukraine. There's lots of things happening in Europe right now where we have to keep our eyes open, and unfortunately, hopefully, history will not repeat itself, but it's much more serious than we think. So in this context here, I'll make this comment.
Thank you so much. Katie, again, thank you, Dr. Katie. Thank you for coming and enlightening us for this talk. We actually have a little something for you to remember us by. I'm going to ask George Morris, our president, to present this to you. I want to tell you, George and I, what we thought of. We have this icon, and it's a little bit more of a different icon. It's called Motherhood, and it shows the generations from Maria to Anna to the Theotokos to Christ. And we thought of you, not only are you a mother, but also we look upon you as being the mother leader of all scholarship around women. And so thank you for your contributions. Thank you for coming and spending your Sunday with us. And our best to you and your research. We look forward to following you as a scholar. I'm sure you're going to see Dr. Katie's name everywhere. We talk about publications. She's going to be publishing, not right now, but soon enough. She's got to rest a little bit, but we're looking for her unique contributions to not only women, but the Holocaust as well. And she gave me even a bigger fan when she talked about the importance of big history. So thank you again for coming.
Yeah, from Bloomfield Chapter presents this to you. We wish you to continue to inspire us with the knowledge and wisdom over multiple generations, as well as be a champion of all women scholars.
We also have a small icon for each of our panelists. This is the famous Russian icon of the Holy Trinity, or the hospitality of Abraham. May you continue to offer your wisdom and your knowledge and your guidance to all of us as we move forward into the next century. So, first one's for John.
That's for Dan.
By way of ending, we have two things left. One is to, again, thank George and all the Hepburn brothers who put forth this idea. We're looking forward to more of these. We have some topics on the back of your brochure. You can see some of the things we're thinking of. If you're interested in something, please let us know as we formulate maybe these on an off-again, on-again basis. And like I told Dr. Katie, she's on my list. She's on my target for a future one. But I also want to end. I want to return back to my parents for a moment and give you one last story of them, and that is before they passed. One of the big arguments, always an argument, of contributions. My dad turned to my mother. The kids were small. We're in the back of our van, and he tells my mother, "I got you. We have Marco Polo. You don't have this." My mother didn't bat an eyelash. She turned and says, "Of course, Marcos Poulos from my village." As a way of saying this, in some ways, we are all Greek. We all contribute to this. We all have so many different stories. I think one of the most fascinating things, as I spent a little more time with Daniel, you learn, and Dr. Katie, it's a very intricate and complicated history that we have. And so our goal our challenge to all of us is to continue to educate, to continue to guide the world. And again, we look forward, Dr. Katie, calling us whenever you need us, even if we're just putting brochures somewhere. We look forward to your research, for your continuation, and again, thank you so much for your time.
Just a couple of words for the next shoot.